Uh, Good evening, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to let me see, it's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Today is the fourth day of the Madras Week celebrations organized by Madras Musings. And as has been the practice for several years now, Wednesday is usually Rosella Stephen Day in the Madras Week celebrations. And compared to the rest of the 7 days, when we deal with some building that was demolished in 1850 or somebody who died in 1910, and generally we mourn the passing of several things that we imagine was very good, which may not have been, and so on and so forth. Rosella has always brought to us something futuristic, just to shake us out of our lethargy and glorify the past. She always helps us to focus on how the future is as exciting, and if not, it may be much better for all we know. And as part of that, uh, I just can't express my delight sufficiently that we've got Krish Ashok, the Krish Ashok, to be here, because it was always my ambition to have him one day on a Madras Week celebration, because in many ways he symbolizes to me a lot of what goes on in Chennai. For the past several years now, I've been following him on Twitter, and I still remember his map of Chennai, where some areas with horizontal marks, some with vertical marks, and how the vertical and the horizontal are forever at war with each other, and so on and so forth. So I can never forget that. That was, I think, years ago, and still I still chuckle over that memory very, very often. And but to give Krish a very formal introduction, Krish Ashok is the author of Masala Lab, The Science of Indian Cooking, published by Penguin Random House. Also a regular columnist on food, science, and culture for publications such as The Hindu, Mint, Scroll, and BuzzFeed. He's a trained Indian classical violinist who also plays the cello and electric guitar, and composes music that you can listen to on all major streaming platforms. A popular playlist is Sanskrit Rock, where he translates and adapts heavy metal and classic rock songs into Sanskrit. His music was featured on NPR. In his day job, Ashok is the global head digital workplace for Tata Consultancy Services, where he helps Fortune 1000 companies reimagine the future of work, a role that is at the intersection of technology, design, and culture. This makes him the right person to deconstruct for us what some call the NFT phenomenon. I know very little about it, but my sons keep telling me that it's all the future. And my younger son, in fact, is now heavily into NFT and things like that, sitting in the United States. And hearing him talk, all I can say is that I wish him well in whatever he is doing, and hope that at the end of it, everything will work out well. The other two participants today with whom Krish will be in conversation, Anand Venkateshwaran, of whom I always knew that avatar, but I have never known the other avatar of Twobadour, is one part of the duo that brought American digital artist Beeple's NFT every day, the first 5,000 days, for $69.3 million at a recent Christies auction. Is it Christies or Christies? I've always wondered. Christies auction, and secured a place in art history. When he isn't exploring NFTs with his partner Vignesh Sundaresan, also known as Metacoven, this crypto tin horn explores NFTs as steward of Metaverse, the largest NFT fund in the world. We have Laya. You must be the youngest ever in the Madras Musings world. All of us saw the age of 50 some years ago. But anyway, Laya Mathikshara is a 13-year-old student. Not you, Anand. I'm sorry, I'm talking about myself and the general readership of Musings. Laya Mathikshara is a 13-year-old student of Chennai Public School. When she's not taking online classes, she's learning programming languages such as Python and minting NFTs. Her works are currently listed on platforms such as Rarible, Foundation, and BazaarX, and have been selling fast. With dreams of pursuing something in the metaverse at the intersection of art and tech, or maybe games as a career, she is now experimenting with generative art, which incorporates code in it. Today, Krish Ashok will be talking to Twobadour and Laya and taking us into a new world. Maybe 50 years from now, people will say Madras Musings had already done all this so many years ago. Welcome, and thank you so much. I'm full of gratitude for the three of you for having come here. And thanks, Rosella, for having brought them together as an exclusive for Madras Music. Thank you very, very much. Over to you, Krish. Laya, you had a question on people's questions and participants' questions. I request everybody to post on the chat box, and towards the end of the session, Varsha will moderate them and present the questions to you people so that you can ask.
Thanks, Sridhar, and thank you for that introduction. And on that note, I think maybe I should mint an NFT out of that Chennai map that I drew about 14 years ago. But on that note, I wanted to start with something that I want to tell Laya, which is that that technology always has this sort of bizarre relationship with society, meaning that on the one hand, it looks to the future, but on the other hand, it has memories of the past so that it is easier for older people to appreciate. And the common example that I often give is that when you send an email, there's something called a CC and a BCC, right? And actually CC stands for carbon copy. And I'm pretty sure you're probably the one person in this room who has never seen a carbon paper or a carbon copying paper in your life, right? And yet, and so we have this very interesting relationship, and that's the beauty and of technology in general. But I want to start off by asking you about your journey as an artist. As an artist, and then as a digital artist, and particularly, and then into the whole idea of programmatic art. So do you want to talk about, and while you do that, I might kind of show some of your artwork to the people listening.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I am Laya Mathikshara. I'm a 13-year-old grade 9 artist from Chennai. And I live with two of my parents and my sister in Chennai itself. And I used to paint and, do portraits and stuffs like that from age 9. And I explored a little bit of tech side, like programming and electronics after a couple of years, like when I was 10 or 11. And during this, lockdown in Chennai, it has been locked down for the past 1.5 years, I guess. So schools have been online, and I had a lot of time after school to explore new hobbies. So I thought, why don't I start with digital art? I always used to follow a couple of digital artists on Instagram, and I always used to wonder how cool they are and how cool stuffs they are doing. So I kind of started with digital art, and when I started, I kind of struggled because usually people take a course or go to a university and do it like a professional thing. But I just started it like a hobby, seeing YouTube videos and stuff. And when I started with digital art, I followed more digital artists on Instagram and Twitter, and kind of noticed a pattern. All of them were talking about NFTs. Like it was interesting to see. I did not know what NFTs were, and they seemed like a weird term, especially for me. It seemed very weird, and when I kind of noticed everyone talking about it. And recently, I think, yes, when I was actually when I actually heard the term NFT, the Clubhouse also became very famous, and everybody started talking about it. So I got an invite from one of my friend, and I joined on Clubhouse. And even on Clubhouse, I wanted to know more about digital art. So I kind of joined a couple of digital art rooms, and I started listening. And I noticed them also talk about NFTs. And NFTs, they actually talk with more complex terms like blockchain and stuff. So I never heard all of those things. And that was confusing. And I was curious what it was and why everybody's talking about it and what's so special about NFTs and stuff. So one Sunday, me and my sister were just sitting, and we were just having a casual talk. And I just asked her, have you heard about NFTs, or like have you heard about NFTs itself? And she was like, no, I'm not sure, but I heard a couple of people talking about NFTs recently. So we went and we kind of Googled about NFTs, and we came across a lot of things. And that's when we kind of noticed how important NFT is and how big impact NFTs are doing in the community, in the society. So I had one of my digital artworks that I minted on Rarible, on Rarible, and I started because I was not a professional artist that time. I just had a couple of artworks ready, so I did not apply for any marketplace or like that. I just wanted to just start and explore NFTs, so I just minted it on Rarible, and that's pretty much how my journey started. And after 3 weeks, one of my the first NFT that I minted was collected by an artist who's actually young, actually. And after that, that's when I actually got the motivation and belief towards NFT itself, because no one believes NFT unless and until something miraculous happens, right? So that's when my family and everyone kind of believed what NFTs were, and that's the first step for me towards the NFT community. And when I got inside the NFT community, I actually wanted to know a couple of more folks in the NFT community itself, because NFT seemed like a tricky and a new thing that's coming. And there weren't much information or things about it online that I could learn. So I wanted to know a couple of folks in the NFT community so that, I know what's happening in the community itself. So that's when I thought the best way to do that is to actually host a gallery and, bring all the artists together and do stuff. So I hosted a gallery in the Metaverse Somnium space where I constructed and hosted the gallery and brought around 20 artists from all over the world, and was able to create a small event like thing there. And that's when I actually got to know a lot of folks in the whole NFT space and in the whole metaverse, or in the whole art and tech side, or basically in the NFT community. And that actually helped me so much during my journey, because I believe NFT is all about community and contacts. So I came to know a lot of people there, and that was it was an interesting interaction to know a lot of folks in the metaverse or artists itself. And recently, I also started exploring a little bit of dynamic art on async. I did a project on mental health, reflecting a poll from Twitter that is about mental health, and that poll kind of reflects an artwork that which I minted as an NFT in async to start with the whole dynamic part of NFTs. And I've also been exploring a little bit of generative art. I felt art and tech. Art in one hand is a very creative thing. Anything that you imagine, you'll be able to implement it. And in tech, it kind of lets you to automate anything. And when these two things kind of intersect together, you can literally automate anything that you want, that you imagine. And I had that freedom with generative art, and I felt that is something interesting, and I should actually start with it, and or at least explore what it was. And that's pretty much how I got into generative art. And I have been minting a couple of my generative art on marketplaces like Foundation, and yeah, I use basic Python and P5.js to start. I'm still exploring generative art, so I'm not really an expert. And yes, that's pretty much my NFT journey so far, and I'm right here sitting in front of you folks.
So the funny thing, Laya, is that we could spend the rest of the time translating what you said for everyone, because I think it's interesting. When I was 13 years old, I was spending all of my time playing underarm cricket, and that's really it. And I was learning violin, which I hated, and under teachers who I hated, and they were busy scolding me for playing Ilayaraja music on my violin, which apparently I'm not supposed to do. So all I'm saying is that it's such an amazing time. So what I want to do is that I want to take some of the words, expressions that you used, things that you living in the digital art world and the world of NFTs that you perfectly understand, that most people don't understand, right? So I'm going to dig into that, and I'm going to sort of pick your head in terms of what those things mean. Right? So the first is that the very fact that a 13-year-old person can not just make art, but host a gallery and find other artists, connect with them, and sell their artwork is by itself incredible. Right? So, but 50 years ago, you needed an entire ecosystem of people. You needed gallery owners. You needed people, and those gallery owners would often have editors who would then decide what art gets to be shown and what art does not get to be shown. And then who gets that access? Whether somebody from India gets access or only somebody from Europe gets access. And then and only if you could afford expensive paints and expensive brushes and expensive canvas could you make great art, or expensive marble for you to sculpt and so on. And yet now all of this can actually be done simply with some kind of computing device, which is far more universally accessible and so on. So a couple of things that I want you to explain. So generative art, if you could maybe really dead simple for someone who doesn't understand programming, what is generative art?
Um, I'm pretty sure everyone knows art, right? Art is just a bunch
Yes.
of colors together, pixels together, nothing too complicated. And talking about the generative art, technology usually, automates stuffs like automatic hand sanitizer or anything like an automatic thing. That's pretty much tech at the end of the day. So what actually generative art means is to generate a couple of pixels with some mathematical equation automatically through a programming language is pretty much what generative art is. Nothing too complicated about it.
So essentially, so think of this as, many years ago, my grandmother once asked me, I was used to work in technology, and she was asked me, she was wondering why she believed that I earned far more salary than I deserved. And so she would ask me, what is it that you exactly do? Because in her mind, only people who are working, who make a car, right, or make some tangible object or sell a tangible object, that's work. So for her, she couldn't get her minds around what this whole software thing was. And the way I explained it to her is that I teach computers to do things. Otherwise, computers are very dumb, right? And in that sense, the simple way to think about generative art is for the artist to train a computer to make pieces of art that, when put together, is far more than what just an individual artist might be able to draw, because there is beauty in mathematics, there is beauty in repeating equations, and so on. And when they combine together, you're able to create the kind of art that I just showed people a while ago, right? So that is generative art. Okay, thank you. So on that note, Twobadour, Anand, so I think we can probably start by parsing a lot of the terms that he spoke about, right? So I want to start with, let's start with blockchain, right? Because I think, before we get to NFTs, let's first understand what is the absolute Aam Aadmi definition of blockchain, if you will. What's the simplest explanation you can give?
Quite honestly, I want to deflect it a little bit, because immediately it will put people to sleep, as it did me.
Yes.
Because I mean, that's the whole point of the NFT space itself, Krish, in a sense. But first, I just wanted to acknowledge the Madras surrealness of this, because some time ago I used to work with the Hindu. I say sometime, that's what I've been saying, but I just realized that my co-panelist was 5 years old when I was at the Hindu. So maybe I have to rephrase it to a long time ago. I was at the Hindu. I used to package Madras Week stories. It was a privilege to work with Sriram Sir stories. I used to write a column for the Sunday magazine called Armchair with a View, which was then continued by Krish Ashok, who I've been a lifelong fan of.
Yes.
So this is sort of in a way, a homecoming for me, and it feels good to come back. It's like being invited back to your school, and the headmaster basically pointing to the student and saying, even if you're at the bottom of the barrel, you can still make something of yourself. So that's the kind of feel I get here. So it's good to be here in that sense, Krish. The reason I deflected the blockchain question is that definitions of blockchain or their implications, it never stuck to me. I first heard about Bitcoin in 2013 at the Hindu's canteen over coffee with Vignesh, actually. But that package of information, it was enough to give him wings and set him off on a journey of massive entrepreneurship. It left me completely unaffected. It took me a lot of meandering, writing about fintech, supply chain finance, and digging into other stuff before I started to understand what he was talking about. But then it actually opened up for me only with the advent of the NFTs inwards. I started to look at where my place in the scheme of things was, and NFTs suddenly brought to life a lot of the abstract concepts that blockchain and Bitcoin deal with. The idea of inalienable ownership, which we'll touch upon a little later, or the idea of independent finance, or removing economy from government, and so on and so forth. They started to make a lot of sense, and you could start to experience these things through art, through gaming worlds, and so on and so forth. So for me, I think the best way or the most useful way to get into crypto would be via NFTs or via experiences like Laya's art, for instance.
So actually, I want to sort of dig into that. So let me maybe use a metaphor, right? So if I wanted to buy let's say even a piece of art somewhere. I would presumably use my credit card, right? At that place. And then some information is sent to a third party called the bank. That bank says, okay, does this guy have enough money in his account? And they make a record of that transaction. And then they say, yeah, this guy has money, and they deduct it. And then they say, yes, approved, etc. And then there's another transaction that goes to the other guy's bank, whoever is the seller and so on. And that guy, the money gets credited into his account and so on. So interestingly, over history, I think where we are is that if two people need to do a transaction, meaning to establish some kind of ownership of a transfer of ownership of a good, I needed a third party. I needed a trusted third party. Okay. So it's been kings in the past and all of that. And, we have now settled down on these banks, and these banks by themselves are backed by a central bank, which kind of defines what a rupee is or what a dollar is or whatever it is, right? So if anything, I think the fundamental change now is when it comes to NFTs or when it comes to blockchain in general, and let's use NFTs as an example, is a way of establishing ownership without a third party, right? Essentially, that is the magic. I mean, in the sense, that's the harder part to understand. It is essentially multiple people whose computing infrastructure is able to collectively build consensus that a transaction happened. That I own this piece of art, I own this piece of land, I own this piece of music, or I paid for this person that much, right? So that is essentially what NFT is. And in it, would it be right to say that it removes the middleman from this entire transaction?
It does. I mean, I couldn't have put it better myself. So I should just shut down and go home now, practically speaking. But no, it's very accurate, Krish. You're right. What NFT is basically a digital certificate, a digital pointer of ownership, saying that this asset belongs to somebody. The asset can be anything from art to an in-game wearable like a virtual hat or a shoe or a gun that you put inside a game, virtual piece of land, and it can point to anybody. The beauty of it is that unlike any other certificate elsewhere in the world, it is immutable in the sense that it can't be destroyed, it can't be changed, it can't be fudged,
can't be edited,
and it does not. It can't be. It can be edited though. I mean, you can augment the information, saying that
but addition, right? So
correct. Only addition. It can't be edited away. So I guess that's the beauty of the NFT, and it does completely remove the middleman.
No, so the other, I wanted to sort of touch upon this idea that this is a part of the world, Chennai particularly, Madras, right, has a history of, and it's just struck me that that in the early 2000s, there were more bloggers in Chennai than anywhere else in India. Okay, so they were the first generation adopters of the internet. So it is therefore not surprising that even the NFT sort of revolution is happening here and not in other cities. I'm sure it will catch up now that there is more technology available. But I wanted to touch upon the fact that it is curious. We spoke about ownership, right? And it is funny how, and we've chatted about it, that Tamil, Hindi, Malayalam, Telugu, you take any Indian language, Bengali, whatever language, Marathi, these languages don't have a word for the verb own. So you can't. So I am owning something, right? There is no present continuous or a verb sense of own. So you can say "ennudayadu" means it is mine, or "ye mera hai." Again, it's not the same thing as saying there is an act of owning, right? That owning has a certain verb, it has an action, and there's a time, therefore a time associated. You own it for a certain period of time and so on. That doesn't exist in Indian languages, and it's not surprising because the concept of things like property ownership have always been different in this part of the world compared to other parts of the world. And it's a difference that people like the British have exploited, the colonialists have exploited. Back in the day, and I'm sure Madras musics will probably say, hey, by the way, some of this is an urban legend. But the point is that, the whole idea of land that did not belong to anyone, right, could effectively be taken over by the colonial enterprise. Say, no, this is now my land, right? And here's the urban legend part. Apparently, some Lord Pembroke was the guy who did this, and therefore Porambok comes from Pembroke and all of that. That's the urban legend. But long story short, it's a fun story to listen to. But what is interesting, I can see the irony that we are now at a time when a 13-year-old can establish ownership of a digital work of art while sitting in Chennai and be able to sell it to people in anywhere in the world. And it is just, I just want you to sort of, share your thoughts on how remarkable that change is.
Most definitely. I mean, let's look at it this way. I commented a little while ago that, Laya was 5 years old when I was in the Hindu. If she had been the artist that she was all those years ago, we wouldn't have had the privilege to experience the art like we are able to today. And that's a massive, massive difference. I mean, the fact that a 13-year-old creates art is not extraordinary. 13-year-olds have always created art, but they have this instant, access to the rest of the world. They can reach out and touch the world. And it is the same for the people who experience her art, right? They're changed in very fundamental ways. That is extremely, that's just awesome. That blows my mind. And, coming back to the idea of ownership, fun story, our own story, the metaverse story of, collecting NFTs and ownership began with plots of virtual land. This is where Vignesh first sort of was able to connect to the idea of NFTs. As you know, the first NFTs were virtually generated cats called CryptoKitties. It was a game on a blockchain, basically. You had to collect a couple of cats. When you combine them, they turned into other cats and so on and so forth. It was fun, but it broke or sort of froze the blockchain for the first time. So people started to realize that apart from this layer of technology and finance, people wanted engagement. I mean, that's what you want to do with your money at the end of the day, right? You want to experience culture and engagement at some level. So we completely bypassed that for some reason. But then the idea of inalienable ownership of land, because ownership is not equal all over the world. It's near absolute in the US, and it's very fungible, sort of very fluid in several
and non-existent in say in China. Correct.
Exactly. Yeah. So when he saw that you could actually own a plot of land, virtual land, and nobody can take it away from you, bully you out of it, it was very evocative, it was powerful. And in another sense, it also represented the focal point of attention in the future. Just like there are hundreds of millions of websites, but your day is still ruled by those 4 or 5 websites that you look at every day. Netflix, or the Google homepage, or the Hindu, stuff like that. So tomorrow, experiences will be focused on these virtual space pieces of land, and it makes sense to collect those. So it is interesting. It is a massive shift in how you look at ownership, how you look at experience.
And so I want to jump back to Laya now, and maybe if you could tell the audience. So art by itself is traditional, visual art, right? 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, right? So 2-dimensional is painting, sketches, and so on some kind of medium. 3-dimensional was essentially sculpture. I mean, these were the only things in the past. I want you to open the audience's mind to the newer kinds and variations of the kind of art that is possible in the digital world. If you could just give us a basic introduction of all the different kinds of art.
Yes, of course. I think 2D art is, pretty much the same, not evolved much. We have 2D art painting. That's 2D art. We do it on digital. We take a picture or something. That's pretty much 2D. And when it comes to 3D,
but they could be 2D animation also, right? In the sense that you could also, they could still be 2D and it could still be moving over time, right? Okay,
yes, of course. And when it comes to 3D, you have, you'll be able to simulate the real life world in a place. That's pretty much what 3D art works. How that pretty much how it works. There's another dimension of artworks called the AR artworks, which are
so that's augmented reality.
Yes, of course. They actually let you view an object from all the dimensions possible, like a real life object, like a object that you have, you can look it around, or have a look at it.
So different people could look at the art from different angles, right? So if it's something like the Mona Lisa, everyone is looking at the same flat thing, but here you could be looking at it from different perspectives. And that changes your experience of the art.
Yes, exactly. The most interesting part about AR art is you actually have a feeling like it is on your hand. You can kind of feel it, but it's not really there. And you can look it from every dimension that you want to. And it's, it lets you actually to travel to the space where the art itself is. And
you can place the art wherever you want it to in a context as opposed to you traveling to a gallery to see something hanging on a wall or on a pedestal. The art can travel with you and be placed in whatever context that you live in.
Yes. So the interesting fact about it is that you can live in the world that where the object lives, or the object can live in the world where you live. And that's it kind of lets you travel through both the dimensions, and that's an interesting form of art. And recently, I think there is dynamic art that websites, marketplaces like async are exploring, which pretty much changes with time, changes with temperature, changes with you know uh, the value of Bitcoin, or which
Wow.
basically changes with anything, which I don't know, there are so many examples that we can
Oh,
actually give
yes.
with
Yep.
dynamic art. Yeah, that's
Yep.
amazing, right? You can change the lighting, or you can change any value that changes through time. You can actually do, you can, I guess you can also do dynamic art, like with sound, like with a frequency, or amplitude, or stuffs like that.
Right. Yeah.
And that's another kind of art that is right now. And as we were talking about, I think generative art is, of course, another
Yeah.
new dimension that people are exploring. It's pretty much simple, creating art with the computers, with programming languages, automating art. And I also think there is AI generated artworks, which take up the previous images, and learn, and to create art. And that's a couple of new artworks that have come in the couple of past 5-10 years.
Astonishing. And I was also reading about how there's also artwork that is entirely games, in the sense that those are virtual worlds where you could be in the virtual world to experience it, and that experience is the experience of that art,
Mhm.
and so on.
I
I
assume that. Yeah, I assume you're talking about a metaverse, right?
Metaverse, right,
Metaverse,
right,
yes,
right.
yes.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Where you can
Uh,
actually play games, and I think
right.
people play paintballs and stuffs there.
Yes,
Buy a
yes,
car
yes.
there, and yes, of course, they have
Exactly.
races
So,
and stuff.
so virtual goods in that virtual world and so on. I know it's some of this is sometimes harder for sort of people to visualize. And I actually remember reading a science fiction novel that was a detective novel about a bank robbery, but except that this bank robbery is not in the real world. The bank robbery is in a virtual world, and it's virtual currency in that virtual world that was stolen. And so it was actually quite a at that time it sort of sounded very mind bending, but this is now reality. Quite fascinating. Thank you. So Anand, I want to sort of touch a little bit upon. I know a lot of people will immediately go, and I showed some of that artwork, and I have sometimes people will look at that kind of art and say, you know what, this is great, but this is not the Mona Lisa, this is not Ravi Verma. There's a tendency of every generation to devalue any art that comes from the next generation. Okay, so I've seen it, since ages. Okay, like how modern art was always seen as being lesser somehow than the art of the Renaissance or the classical period, and so on. So I want you to talk about, as someone who invests in art, right? What, how does society perceive the value of art?
Interestingly enough, you use the word Renaissance, right? I believe we are at a Renaissance now, Krish, and it's interesting that people will slowly start to recognize this, because the NFT space, the crypto space, is a Renaissance because it's a convergence of technology, of financial instruments, and brilliantly, it's driven by culture for the first time. All of the other inflection points in the crypto journey so far, if you look at Bitcoin, if you look at altcoins, the ICO boom and bust, and DeFi and all of that, they were driven by financial instruments for the most part. Token prices go up and down and all of that volatility. The NFT space, on the other hand, is driven by culture. It has found space for creators, for artists, for musicians who never had a place in the crypto journey so far. People like Laya, like myself, who felt like outsiders, peeking in, now have a place here. So we are at the Renaissance. And that's why the work that is created here starts to become very valuable in that sense. The people who spend money on crypto art are people who have made money through crypto for the most part. You don't see a lot of traditional art buyers looking at it, at least not until we sort of kicked open a couple of doors recently. But the most people who buy crypto art are people who get the story, who get the narrative behind this. and
Right.
who understand that they are in the middle of a renaissance, and what they're effectively doing is bankrolling the renaissance by
Exactly. Right.
buying this art.
And I want to sort of give a historical parallel here, right? So when Da Vinci was painting his masterpieces, he was doing it while being patronized by the Medicis in Florence, right? They were very ultra rich, the Ambanis of Florence, if you will, right? And clearly, they were the richest people in town. Da Vinci couldn't just draw whatever he wanted. Okay, so he was clearly constrained in what they wanted him to draw, right? For example, Bach, all the music that he made, he was being paid a salary. He was being commissioned by the church in Leipzig. And they said, well, your contract is you need to make 300 pieces of music in a year. Imagine that, 300 pieces of music he has to compose in a 365-day year. And so he was constrained by the subject. He was constrained by the patronage. And it's not like he could go to another church, or he could find another Medici family to bankroll him and so on. I can see that this world now really puts the artist firmly in control. Says that I have done something incredibly interesting. I think it's incredibly interesting, but I am not subject to what some tastemaker thinks is good, because I can find my audience. So historically, the gallery and the patron would have to bring the audience. They own the audience. You were completely subject to the fact that they bought the audience. But now you can, let's say, make a generative art based on, say, the Bombay Stock Exchange price and set it to music. And that piece of artwork, you can go find someone who's interested in that, who's interested and who has the ability to patronize or buy it or collect it.
Yeah.
And I think that I think is a remarkable change. Don't you think?
Yeah. Is that to Laya or to me, Krish?
To you. Yes.
Yeah, most definitely. And I
Yes.
suppose the most evocative part of this is that, a couple of Madras boys are the Medicis of the metaverse.
Exactly.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
And the fact is, if you look at the art scene in general, I mean, tech, like you said, the reason people from Chennai, or people from the South, or people from the global South sort of attach themselves to new technology is because it's a launch pad for them. It helps them leapfrog an otherwise very difficult journey, from bottom to top, or wherever it is. It's the same culturally also. The world is moving towards a sort of a hegemonical thing all over the world. It's the same in India. India is a country of many countries. And look at the art scene in Chennai itself. It's vibrant with artists, but there is no art scene as such. There's no art market as such, because all of the representation is from up north. And for you to even make that journey is a generational effort. On the other hand, because of crypto, now Laya is a global artist. She doesn't have to, like you just mentioned a few minutes ago, have to depend on art galleries or on curators to acknowledge that, okay, I agree that Laya is an artist. That's not how it works anymore. The middleman is completely gone. She doesn't have to spend 10 years in, crawling her way up the Vindhyas and into Delhi, when she can directly go and, expose the art to somebody in New York or elsewhere.
Absolutely. I think so. What we'll do is that I'm going to ask one last thing to Laya, and then let's take questions from the audience. I think there were a couple of interesting counterpoints related to middlemen and all of that. So we'll get to that. So Laya, I want to sort of want to ask you about what are your plans for the future? What other new kinds of art do you want to sort of get into? And maybe also briefly tell us about the tools. You spoke about Python and the programming languages. What are the other tools that you use today, right? The artist of the past would talk about how I use camel hair for my paintbrush, and I use paint from this German company, canvas from paper made in Egypt or whatever. But what are the tools of the digital artist, if you will?
I pretty much use Cinema 4D and P5.js and Python. That they are my favorite tools that I use for 3D artworks or generative artworks. And for a little bit of effects, for special effects, I use Photoshop sometimes. But yes, of course, Cinema 4D, Python, and P5.js are my favorite ones that I use.
Lovely. And so, what are your plans for the future?
Yes, I'm hoping to pretty much explore more about the intersection of art and tech. because I think the technology is moving very fast every single day. A couple of years back, NFTs were not there. So I really don't want to stick with something like art or something specific in art, because technology is too fast and we can judge it. So I would say my interest is in art and tech. So I hopefully try exploring more about art and tech, like metaverse, or of course mind uploading is a very interesting thing, I think, that we can all explore and accept about. So hoping to explore more about metaverse or AR artworks, or I don't know, anything that comes up in the future, that I would love to explore about. Of course, even blockchain to tell. Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm hoping to explore in my future.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it. So Anand and Laya, I'm going to go through some of the questions that are there, and I'll sort of, each of you feel free to address. I might address it to one of you, but feel free to add your points to those questions. I think there was one question that I think is primarily for, I guess, Anand, is that Randolfo wants to know whether these platforms, if you will, both your platform as well as all of the other platforms that Laya talked about, Async and WazirX, and many of these other platforms where you can go discover creators, discover art, collect it, and sell it to others, and so on. Aren't they the new middlemen, if you will? Right. At the end of the day, some company somewhere owning some IT infrastructure has to be responsible for recording that transaction, if you will. Are you actually removing the middleman? Maybe I think you might want to maybe get into why this is slightly different from the middleman of the past. Maybe go ahead.
Sure. I mean, it is different because, say, one of the platforms Laya mentioned was Rarible, which is basically open to anybody. It does not record, transactions. It does not, how do I say? It does not provide escrow services. It doesn't keep your money and then pass it on to the artist. It goes directly to the artist. Most platforms are like that. Why people go to some of these platforms is that they trust the sensibilities of those platforms, say, in a sense, like Super Rare. So they trust the kind of art that goes on Super Rare. They trust the platform to sort of vet the artist prior.
The curation.
If you're feeling curation, if you will, but only at the artist level, in a sense. So if you feel adventurous, go dive into Rarible. You can find diamonds in the rough. You can find absolute rip-offs also on both sides. So that is there. But there are platforms like Async, which cannot exist in the real world. They are not like digital copies of existing art markets elsewhere. They can exist only on the blockchain. For instance, the example that Laya spoke about, like changes in price fluctuation of Bitcoin or changes in day and night affecting the art can only happen on the blockchain and can be recorded on the blockchain, can be automated there. So Async is a unique platform in that sense. It's the first platform that introduced the concept of programmable art. We happen to have the first ever instance of programmable art, which was named First Supper, which is a collaboration between 13 artists. The thing is, this artwork has like 13 layers, each one created by a different artist, and then there's a master layer. So, people all over the world can own each of these 13 layers. They can own it individually. Like, say, the sky or the background is one layer. You can control if it's going to be blue or black or day or night, and you get to become part of the art story. So whoever holds the master gets to see change on an hourly basis or a daily basis, the changes that are happening there. So this sort of a thing can exist only on the blockchain. So there are various kinds of platforms that curate very specifically, platforms that are open to everybody and allow you to create art, and platforms like Async, which are tech-based and can exist only on the blockchain.
Right. I think the key distinction is that these platforms have far less middleman power than the platforms of the past. I think that's the key distinction.
In fact, no middleman power.
They do exist. They do provide a service. In some sense, they may provide curation. But if the artist does not like the curation, they can just move elsewhere. I mean, they're just so many platforms, right? And by the way, even if they don't want to use a platform, they could just do it by themselves. Exactly. Right? At the end of the day, it's about having some kind of a wallet and being able to make that art directly available to someone. I guess you could just do directly peer-to-peer selling if you wanted to. If you didn't want to go through a place where people discover it and so on, you can just directly, maybe somebody just says, you know what, you're such an amazing artist, I'm going to pay you for the next 10 years to just give me one piece of artwork every year or something, right?
That
I
happens
think
even today. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Laya, you
Sorry,
wanted to add.
Laya.
I just want to mention, I think a couple of artists are actually, starting their own marketplaces where they have
Exactly.
their own thing or their own collection on their marketplaces itself, so that they don't, have any, they don't go through any marketplace or something, so that it's kind of easy for them, and they have the confidence, like especially certain. From the perspective of an artist, certain marketplaces expect us to, apply, and then they choose, and all of those things are not really a nice thing for an artist. From an artist perspective, it's like judging someone, right? So
Right.
in that perspective, I feel some artists are actually starting to have their own marketplaces and do
Super.
themselves.
That's even more amazing, right? The fact that the artist can simply say, you know what, you don't want me in your gallery. I am just going to build my own gallery, if you will.
Yeah.
It's the equivalent of an artist saying that. So the next question is around how does copyright and licensing work for digital art?
Just like elsewhere, I suppose it depends on what you're using the art for. The funny part of buying digital art or NFTs is that the owner does not get any rights over the work of art. So the ownership itself is kind of tenuous. It's not like he can, he has full freedom to use the artwork commercially or elsewhere. All of that still rests with the artist only. And when it comes to elements which are IP protected, like say if you want to use Mickey Mouse in your digital work of art, that is contentious, definitely.
Yes.
If it's purely a work of art and you're not doing anything else with it, maybe it's fine. It's still sort of contentious. Where it gets interesting is that elsewhere in the internet, it is impossible to track, impossible to sort of curb down on. In the NFT space, the provenance is very clear. Right? This is the work of art, and there is a digital pointer pointing out to this is the owner, this is the artist that minted it. That relationship is extremely clear, and so it becomes easy to form either rules or regulations or limitations or even permissions around copyright and this one, which is why a lot of companies like say
more transparently
brands
than ever
more transparently, like NBA Top Shots, for instance, which is all around basketball. So the IP is very clear, the rights are very clear, the rules are very clear. So I'd say it's actually easier to do that on an NFT.
Yep, super. So another question is, NFTs are being minted constantly, right? So a few days ago, cryptocurrency entrepreneur Justin Sun bought a picture of a rock with laser eyes for $500,000. It wasn't even a good picture of a rock. So when people are buying everything from cutting edge generative art to crudely drawn rocks, what stage of the collecting cycle would you say we are in right now? I guess it's really a question about taste, right? At the end of the day,
it is. Interestingly enough, I think we are still at the beginning stage. I don't think the real explosion has happened yet. What we've seen so far is the trend sort of skews towards acquiring things, about collecting them, about trying to own them. The real explosion will happen when people figure out what to do with them. So I have all of these bunch of NFTs. How do I experience them? Where do I experience Laya's art apart from just a two-dimensional screen? Can I make it an immersive experience? Can it pop out to me in AR? When that happens, the real explosion will happen. But otherwise, I don't see a massive difference between like traditional art and the NFT art space, where
that is true.
A lot of it can be considered frivolous or drivel, and really good ones are a small percentage. So I would say anything that is an NFT is great art. That's not true.
You're right. So I want to use this opportunity to share my screen and show everyone, since we spoke about Jackson Pollock, this is Jackson Pollock's art. Okay. His art is hundreds of millions of dollars, each one of them. Right.
Yeah.
And if you sort of see how he actually does it is basically stand on top of giant paper and spray paint pretty randomly, seemingly. Right. Now, the point is that it is actually hard for us individually, as an individual looking at this, to say, how is this art? This is actually no different from someone or some old Chennai mama listening to rock music and saying, how is this music? Right? This is all noise, right? So art is always in the eyes and the ears of the beholder, of the people who experience it, right? So the people who appreciate Van Gogh's art, despite somebody saying that, this looks like some class 10 kid drew it. It doesn't look like some, look at Da Vinci's painting. It's so realistic and so on. But there is a deeper story behind that. And in fact, even Beeple's work, the one that you guys bought, is is not about the individual pieces, 5,000 individual pieces of art, but that guy's journey of on what he did on days when he, went through illness, when he was, unwell, when he was joyous, when he was happy, when his wife went through pregnancy. It is his life story and 5,000 days of it. And that is the art, and that's the experience. And a lot of this, as I say, the value of art is entirely perceptual. It's in our collective imagination. If 10 people believe this is amazing and are willing to pay something for it, that's art. That's really what it is. It's very hard for us to sort of, I know some creators push the envelope. Jackson Pollock pushes the envelope, right? In music, somebody called John Cage once made something called 4 minutes and 33 seconds.
433.
433 has no music. It's just silent, right?
Yeah.
And the experience is whatever the other sounds you hear while the orchestra is just sitting playing nothing is your experience of that music, right? It is hard for us to appreciate, but that's really what it is. So another question is around obviously. Let's say I want to invest in NFTs. I have a fear that it's possibly a bubble. How can I be reassured?
If you think it's a bubble, and if you're looking at it as an investment, you're probably right. There's every chance that it could be a bubble. There's every chance that tomorrow there would be no buyers for the NFT that you hold. That said, if you wanted to understand NFTs and sort of experience them, the best way would be to start at a place that you understand outside even of crypto. For instance, if you're a gamer, start playing Axis. If you're into sports, get into NBA Top Shots or Sorare, football or basketball. I mean, if you're into music, check out Async Arts music section, or say, Record Shop. Start at a place that you're most familiar with in your real life, and there is an equivalent space in the NFT space. In other words, approach it culturally rather than financially, and you should be fine. Because at the end of the day, you're still left with something that you bought or you engaged with because it spoke to you, because you appreciate it, rather than trying to number crunch your way through its future value. Because let me tell you, there is not enough historic data to support any sort of reasonable analysis of where this is going to go. There's just not enough data. Nobody knows. And the space is changing so fast, it compounds innovation. It compounds opportunity as well. So I'd start at a place that you're familiar with and that you'd enjoy, even if you don't make money off of.
And Laya, do you want to add some of your for people who are beginners to NFT art? How would you say they should go about discovering really interesting artwork that pushes their boundaries of thinking about what art is, and really changes their preconceived notion? So would you have some recommendations of how a complete beginner should go about discovering NFT art?
I see art as a collecting thing. Like you go to a seashore and you collect shells. They really don't, they really don't give a benefit at the end of the day. But that's something that you'd like to collect because it's beautiful or because it's a thing in the nature. I look at art from that perspective. It's just it's just a beautiful thing that you can collect. Not really if it really does not have a financial benefit, like how Twobadour said, it still speaks to you, right? It's still an art at the end of the day. So I would say any art that you feel like collecting, any art that you feel like having, or having a small ownership with the art, is something that you should go about. It could be an AR art, it could be a dynamic art or generative art, or any art that speaks to you, that you like, or that the story that you like about the art, or the story that you like about the artist, or the technology that you like about the art, or it could be anything that speaks to you from the art perspective, is something that you should actually choose for collecting. I feel, from an artist's side.
I think that's a really great point. I mean, which is to look at this as a cultural phenomenon first, appreciate it for the art, and don't think of it as a, can I make a quick buck here, is I think not the first question to ask for a trend like this. I guess is the advice from both Anand as well as Laya.
Ironically, that's the best way to make money as well.
Well, and so one, I think Himanshu asks, and I don't quite sure I understand, but maybe you might understand. What are your thoughts on profile picture / avatar projects and the cultural significance of them?
No, it's interesting. There is this concept of a pseudonymous economy, which is first spoken of by Balaji Srinivasan. The idea is that we have many faces in our life, right? I mean, anybody that's owned a game or bought, say, PS2 or whatever it is, the first thing you do is to set an avatar name to yourself, some sort of a pseudonym. So we're familiar with that concept, but where it attains some sort of significance in crypto is that for the first time, you can not only use that pseudonym to express yourself, but also to earn. There is money that comes back. So as Twobadour, nobody knew what I looked like or sounded like or who I was for like 8 months in the NFT space. It was a clean slate to me. It was a non-judgmental runway where I just brought in what I could onto the table, and I was able to make these really profound and interesting connections with artists and other creators in the space. So the idea of avatars or these collectibles that you use as your avatars, I think it speaks to this. People are always searching for an identity and a sort of community that they want to belong to, and that's why it's picked up so as well as it has done in the NFT space. One of the avatar, the first one, in fact, projects of this sort was called CryptoPunks. Very low-res pixelized, avatars, faces. The floor value, or the only 10,000 were ever generated. So the bottom price of each CryptoPunk is now in the millions of dollars.
Wow.
Yeah, the very first project, and the subsequent ones have not done so badly either. Each of them, the format is the same, but then the floor price is now at like 3 Ethereum, which is like $6,000, $7,000, or $10,000, and so on and so forth. It's just that it's not just the idea of collecting it, but the stronger the community around it. People go around saying I'm a punk because they've got that, or I'm an ape, or I'm something else. There are better versions of, or more palatable versions of that to our audience as well. But that's the whole idea of it, a search for identity, basically, in community.
You make a very deep point, which is that it struck me that are what we call real life identities are despite the world telling you that, you control your identity, you actually don't. You don't control which family you're born to, and therefore what community, caste, religion you come from. You don't control your skin color, you don't control your height, and you don't control many other aspects of, depending on which part of the world and its arc of history. You either go to a good school or a bad school, or a good university or a bad university. There are so many things that people don't have control over in terms of their identity. So it's therefore not surprising that the idea of a virtual identity over which every pixel, every element of it, you have complete control over, is exceedingly powerful. And therefore, I think, sort of like the opening point of how I think ultimately people will have both, a lot of great science fiction writers, Neil Stephenson and everyone else, always talk about the idea of two separate things, your what they call meat space identity and your cyberspace identity, if you will, as being entirely different things. And that you could have an employment in the virtual world, entirely new identity, new kind of skills, new things different things that you would do, things that you would never do in the physical world, and so on. I think it's a fascinating space. And one question for Laya from Ashok Pandian is, where should young budding artists look for information to make their digital art journey easier? And I know you spoke about how you had to you did a lot of Googling, and obviously you're extraordinarily smart, probably in the top 0.01 percentile of smart people in Chennai. But, average people, if you were to help them save time on where to look for information, where do you get started?
I would prefer starting with, Googling. Of course, that's the best thing that we all have right now, internet. And, as it's a little towards the financial part, people might be a little skeptical about the whole thing. So I would actually prefer, joining clubhouse rooms or, any human to human interaction more than some kind of text to human interaction, because that kind of, helps us to understand more and, have a belief in the whole NFTs or art, the old crypto thing. So I would prefer joining clubhouse rooms or Discord channels, or somewhere where you can actually have an interaction with the expert itself, or like have a nice communication, so that you kind of understand, get the faith, and helps you to start with NFTs itself. So that's pretty much something that I would prefer or suggest with what I have done, and that's what I used to start my whole journey. So
Absolutely. Thank you. That's fantastic advice, because I think, as you rightly said, speaking to people is better than trying to read stuff yourself. And Clubhouse is a fantastic space for discovering fellow artists and NFT collectors and others, and hopefully, ask them questions, and you get answers. And it's always better to hear it from experts rather than try to read and interpret your own stuff. So I think, we're at the top of the hour. So I want to sort of, end with two questions. I want to end with one question that I want both of you to answer. What kind of really truly creative, out of the way, and I kind of saw your Metaverse Fund, your website as well, where you kind of say that you guys are also have a studio for conceptualizing the kind of art that has potential in the NFT space and so on. What Chennai themed kind of art would you like to see in the near future?
Anand, I'll let Laya go first.
Yes. Oh, okay, Laya. Yes.
I think minting our own culture itself in the blockchain is the best thing to start with, because we are going towards modernization. Things are changing. Everything is pretty much changing now. So especially after the pandemic, we have all changed too much towards the internet, and we have not even gone out of our houses. So I think culture, the tradition is kind of getting a little out and out of our daily lives.
Artistic representations of culture, you mean?
Okay. Yes, of course, artistic representation of cultures, or information, any text, or it could be a poem, or it could be anything, pretty much.
Yep.
That
Absolutely.
I would prefer putting on the blockchain. It could be a tirukural, it could be a song, it could be anything that our culture represents, that we put it on blockchain, because I assume Tamil culture is one of the oldest that we pretty much have right now, and preserving an amazing thing like that actually is a very important thing for our human evolution itself. So that's pretty much what I would do, starting to put our culture in the blockchain. And in the near future, I would look putting our brains into the blockchain, because that's something that we might need in a couple of years, right? Of course. So.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, what Laya said was prescient and extremely profound. Massive compliments, Laya. I mean, what she described is the whole purpose of NFTs in a sense. They become capsules that that preserve culture. Think about it, right? Apart from just like 5 or 6 European languages, all of the rest of the world languages are on the wane in that sense, right? Yeah. Unless your art or your culture can be expressed in those 5 languages, it's not considered art. So NFTs are a perfect vehicle to preserve that, to preserve history, to preserve culture. And I'm happy to report that Metaverse is working on both those ideas that Laya is speaking of, and that work is happening in Chennai as we speak. On the one hand, we are, trying to revive and preserve, cultural, not just texts, but also as productions, as animated stuff, movies and stuff, as NFTs. On the other hand, we're also working on using GPT-3 to preserve a lot of Tamil stuff.
Yes. Interesting.
As NFTs. So I can't tell you any more at this moment, but it's something that I'm sure will blow our minds.
I'm already, quite excited to see what that could be, right? I to end this, and before I hand it over to Sriram, is that, art, as always in my mind, has always been about dimension. So there is 2-dimensional art, and then, it's 3-dimensional when it becomes sculpture. And it's 4-dimensional when that sculpture moves through time, which is how we think about videos or movies per se. But it's 5-dimensional when it gives you control over how you experience that virtual world, and that's where virtual games and augmented reality kind of comes in. And I think you can just keep it. It can get richer and richer. Now, as she spoke about generative art, now if I add a generative element where some external variable changes my experience of what's happening inside, it becomes even more fascinating. So I think the possibilities, I guess, just multiply themselves and quite endless. So on that futuristic note, let me hand it over to Sriram. And thank you for being fantastic guests.
It was so fabulous, riveting right through. Of course, there were certain portions that slid very easily off my bald head, but there was a lot that, that I really learned today, and I really look forward to knowing a lot more. As always, I've had more questions in my mind now than what I, before the whole program. And Laya, I must say that you're the star of the show, because apart from the messages that are coming in on the chat box, I'm having so many messages over here on my phone saying, who is this kid? What is she? Genius. How is she able to talk like this? She knows so much about technology, this, that, and sundry. Anand or Twobadour, to give your avatar name on this particular talk. So thank you so much. I think it was just wonderful. And as always, it took us into a new realm. I'm sure, particularly what you said at the end is talking about preservation and the using of this kind of technology. Please do let me know when it can be made open, and then, so that, I can interact in my own small possible way, because I do have with me a couple of repositories in this city, which are continuously looking for new ways and new methods of preservation of what they have. And, we can definitely collaborate if there comes such an opportunity. They are very
Awesome.
old world organizations, but they have a lot of stuff that requires new world methods of preservation and taking forward. So I think that would be a great thing. Do let me know as and when we can have a chat on that and we can take it forward.
Yes,
Great.
even I would love to.
Since we don't send you home empty-handed, this will reach you in the next 1 week. I'm sorry, wow. It's very old world, but it's a fantastic book on Chennai history and art. It is Madras Inc. The Perspectives of an Artist and an Architect, a collaborative effort between Manohar Devdas and Sujata Shankar. The copies of the book will reach you. Varsha will get your physical addresses, and in the old world way, the book will arrive shortly. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so very much for having been a part of last week's celebration.
So I want to end with a very slightly humorous question to think about, whether Twobadour's online avatar, virtual metaverse avatar, will it have its own Aadhaar card, or something for us to think about in the future? It may not be such a silly question, in the future, if it's a separate avatar that has its own revenue, has its own virtual address, and so on. Anyway, on that note, thanks everyone.
Thank you so very much.
Thanks so much.
Bye. See you. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you so much for
having me. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks a lot for joining us, all of you. And I'll be ending the chat now. The recording.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laya. It was lovely. It was a great discussion.
Yes, it was lovely talking to all of you guys.
Bye-bye.
Good to meet you.
Bye-bye. Good to meet you as well. Bye-bye.